Not got any early birds this morning. Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. As usual, welcome to the Connect Resound Learning Festival. I think most of you in the room so far are people who've attended previous sessions, so welcome back. You know the drill by now for webinars. If you have questions for our presenter, Dr. Elizabeth Stafford, we'll answer those at the end of the session, but please pop them in the Q&A section as they occur to you. If you want to say hello to your fellow delegates and the panelists, just pop your hellos in the chat. And similarly, if you've got any technical issues or anything you want to let me know about, let me know in the chat as well. We've got closed captions as usual for this morning's session. So you can just click the CC closed captions button in Zoom and you'll be able to see those captions coming up on your screen. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. We're just letting everybody who's in the waiting room into the webinar and then we will kick off. So we'll just give it maybe one more minute and then we'll start. Good morning, everyone. We're just almost about to start. I'll just quickly do some housekeeping while you're all arriving. Welcome to this morning's Connect Resound Festival and to this session on the Automated Music Hub. For those of you who haven't attended a session before, we've got closed captions for this event. So if you'd like to click on the CC closed caption button on your Zoom toolbar, you'll be able to see those on your screen. If you have a question that you'd like Elizabeth to answer after her presentation, please do pop it in the Q&A and do say hello in the chat. Hi, Hilary. Hi, Alan. Okay, we've got a lot of you here promptly this morning, so I'm going to hand over to Sarah McWatt to formally open the session. Enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on the Automated Music Hub. Emily has done a wonderful job of housekeeping, so I will press on with introductions. I'm the director of NIMAS. I am a white woman in my mid-40s. Today I'm sitting in front of a blue background with the Connect Resound logo and the NIMAS logo on it, and I'm wearing a yellow and black checkered jacket with a black dress underneath. So I'm really excited about today's session. I'm going to shortly welcome our presenter, Dr. Elizabeth Stafford. She is the Director of Music Education Solutions and the editor of Primary Music magazine. She's over 20 years of experience in the primary music sector, and she's worked as a specialist music education teacher for various local authorities before moving into teacher development for Trinity College London and the Open University, and then Music Education Solutions, where she's programme leader for Level 4 Certificate for Music Educators. She's a regular contributor to Music Teacher magazine and Teach Primary magazine, a reviewer for the British Journal of Music Education, and she's in regular demand as a guest lecturer at conservatoires and universities across the UK. She currently teaches reception and Key Stage 1 music in the West Midlands, and we're really delighted to have her with us today. So today's session is going to take us through a case study exploring the Automated Music Hub, how VR, AI and online learning trends may impact the work of instrumental teaching service providers. So as we know, through the pandemic, the march towards automative processes has been accelerated. And with these advances in technology, automation is not just an option for replacing administrative processes, but has much wider potential to replicate many human roles. Many musicians are self-taught, and our sector does value this route into music alongside teacher-led approaches, but today we'll consider how automation and new technology could affect the balance between these two routes in the future now that we're more used to learning online. So over to you, Dr. Elizabeth Stafford. Really delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. So let me just quickly share my screen with you. There we go. So I'm really delighted to be here today. Or, well, am I here or am I there or where am I? I'm somewhere in the virtual world. I'm existing on many planes today to talk to you about the Automated Music Hub. And we're going to look at various different aspects of automation, of artificial intelligence, and how those are already impacting the work of music service providers, and also how they might in the future, the things that are kind of coming along in the pipeline as we go along. Okay, so it's always good to start a presentation by quoting yourself, but here's a quote from an article I wrote about the rise of automation. So automation's always been a thing, and we've always been sort of moving towards more automated processes, so having computers do things that humans used to do by hand. You could argue that all forms of technology that we've ever invented are ultimately a form of automation for something that a human used to do by hand. But the pandemic in particular has sort of accelerated a lot of that work for a number of reasons. And there are economic reasons, there are practical reasons, technological reasons. But it's important to know that it's not just a COVID thing. It's not just a kind of flash in the pan knee-jerk reaction to COVID. Prior to the COVID pandemic, we were already predicting, so Oxford University, for example, predicted by 2035 it would be possible for restaurants, retail and recreation centres to automate between 60 to 90% of all jobs. And that is before any of this crazy world illness stuff happened. So this is something that has been coming for a while, and it shows no sign of slowing down. And in fact, the pandemic has accelerated our progress towards this. Which, as Hinsliff pointed out last year, is inextricably linked to the pandemic, in that prior to the pandemic, in order to sort of start automating things, you were going to cause disruption, whether that be to your supply chain, whether it be to your customers, and it was going to be annoying. But now, of course, we're used to living with disruption, and certainly for the sectors that were shut for a long period of time, well, that was the perfect time for them to go, okay, well, we may as well switch over to these automated processes that, you know, we've been thinking about but weren't sure how we were going to do it. And even for those people who haven't made that leap yet, because the end user is used to all this disruption and is used to having to change how they do things, you know, almost at a whim, this is what I think has really driven that idea of, oh, actually it is possible, we can start this automation process. That plus the fact that obviously businesses across all sectors are trying to save money, and automation can do that for you. It tends to be, you know, an expensive process to set up, but once it's set up, it is going to then save you money pretty much forever. So those two things, the fact that there's been space and time to do this when businesses have been closed, and or customers are used to disruption, so they won't really be bothered by a little bit more of sort of an interruption in service, coupled with, okay, how are we going to claw back some money because we've all lost loads of money across all the sectors, is what has kind of driven this acceleration towards automation. And while we might think, well, that's great because businesses will be able to save money and get back on an even keel, and we'll all be able to have a better level of service from our sort of automated processes and machines, we must remember that every time you automate something, effectively somebody loses their job. And although, again, as we've said, the pandemic is accelerating the need for these automated processes, there is a moral question to be had here. There are ethics to consider about, you know, if you've had somebody on furlough for a long time, to then go, oh, actually, we've replaced you with a computer now, so see ya, may not be, you know, entirely morally the correct thing to do. And unfortunately, it is the people in those kind of low paid, low skill areas whose jobs are most easily replicated by machines. So it's people, the most vulnerable sector of our working society, effectively, who are then going to be hit with the double whammy of, well, you've had this COVID stuff, you might have been on 80% pay for a long time. Guess what? Now you don't have a job at all. So that is something that, while we're embracing all this amazing technology and we know it's coming, we know it's inevitable, we still do have to put that kind of background work into the moral and the ethical dilemmas that go with that automating of all of our processes. Okay, so probably the thing that people know most about at the moment in terms of sort of automation and technology is the rise of remote working. I have actually always worked at home, apart from obviously when I'm in the classroom. I've been working from home since 2007, so this is not a new thing for me. What is new is that now all of a sudden there's all this technology in the mainstream that makes that even easier than it was before. I used to have to log on through a virtual private network in order to be able to download my emails and all that kind of stuff. It was clunky and often timed out and was exceedingly annoying. Now everything pretty much is in the cloud. It's very, very easy for you to get access to everything that you need. You don't need to physically be in an office or with a wired internet connection on a particular network in order to be able to access all of your stuff. Conference calling, hello, we're doing that right now. Obviously, it did exist. Skype first, and then Zoom's kind of taken over, I think, a little bit from Skype because it's got a bit more functionality about it. And also Google Meets and Microsoft Teams as well. So those, again, have become in normal use. It used to be really weird to want to do a video conference. Now it's just quite normal. Now I would say it's probably weirder if someone just rings you up on the phone. You're just used to getting sent a Zoom link and being able to talk. So that has obviously made things much easier in terms of remote working. And I'm sure pretty much everybody here today has been touched by that in some form. And of course, the other thing we have to remember is 5G, because 5G actually makes a lot of this possible in areas where there isn't, good coverage of high-speed broadband. And 5G is going to make it easier not only for us to work from home, but also to work on the go, to work when we're just out and about, when we're not near a Wi-Fi signal. Through 5G, we will be able to still check our emails on top of a hill or, in a bar, although whether that's a sensible thing or not, I'll leave that up to your own personal discretion. So all of these things are coming at the right time to mean that we have been able to adapt really well in most sectors to remote working. There are, of course, many jobs that can't be done remotely. You would probably, until now, have thought that education was one of those ones where you needed to be face-to-face, but we have shown that we can do it not face-to-face. I wouldn't say any of us would say that we thought that was the best approach, but it can be done, which then gives you more flexibility in terms of your delivery of lectures in the higher education, further education sector, lessons in the primary and secondary sector, perhaps in situations where, previously a teacher might have been off sick. For example, they might now be able to actually do their teaching but be beamed into the classroom from home. Not if they're actually feeling poorly. I'm thinking of schools that have those rules, like, for example, if you break a limb, they decide it's not safe for you to be in the building. And once you've got your painkillers and your pot on, there's no reason that you couldn't be in front of a screen at home being beamed in to your class to deliver that kind of continuity of service. So it definitely is something that education will use. I can't see it replacing all the things we do. I think it will definitely be alongside our sort of face-to-face, being in a room delivery, but remote working is definitely something that education will be, holding on to in some form or another as we move forward. Okay, so going on to the idea of music education hubs, who obviously are partnerships of lots of different organisations. And what I focused on today is the fact that most, not all, but most music education hubs have some kind of aspect of an instrumental programme and instrumental music service. And so that's where my examples will come from today. But a lot of what I talk about will be applicable to anybody doing any form of education or any form of music. And we're going to start with automation, and then we're going to move through to some of the more kind of crazy aspects of technology as we go through. But starting with automation, we will see that actually automated processes can be applied to pretty much every aspect of what a music education hub does. So if we take administration first, which is, again, one of those, not to be rude to administrators, but it classes as one of those kind of low-level jobs that might very well be replaced by automation. And you can see that in this big, long list of things that you are able to do now. So your billing can all be done through cloud-based software. That's something that people have been using for a long time now anyway, and I'm sure lots of hubs have moved to that system rather than having someone, type out an invoice and work it all out by hand. Your payroll as well, that can all be done through cloud-based software. It can be outsourced as well to other companies to do through a cloud-based system. Timetabling, timetabling. I used to be responsible for a timetable in a university, and let me tell you, that was the worst 2 weeks of my life every year. But now there are systems, and again, cloud-based or hardware software that is able to do that kind of thing for you. You just put everybody's details in and where they need to be and what they need to do, and it just magically fixes everything for you. Still kind of needs a bit of oversight from a human to make sure that it's sensible and viable, but that software and those systems do exist. And concert ticketing, of course, or indeed like today's event ticketing, using things like Eventbrite, where the person just puts all the details in and everything just gets sent to them automatically, and you don't really have to have any involvement in it beyond setting up the original sort of system for people to book onto. Customer service is probably one of the places where people are most uncomfortable, I think, about automation. But anybody who's interacted with any form of online shopping will have had a bot pop up in the corner going, "Can I help you?" And they do have their uses, and most people are going to be asking you similar kind of questions. So once you have programmed your bot to understand, the key answers to those key questions, in most situations they are going to be helpful. At some stage, you're always going to want to talk to a human. So I can't see, robots answering the phones being particularly useful in a music hub context. But for those kind of inquiries, how do I pay my bills, all that kind of stuff, the sort of stuff that you might put in a frequently asked questions section of your website that people just don't read and then ring you up and ask you. We've all been there. Those kind of questions, having a bot in the corner that you can have a little chat with, really useful. And I've put photocopying in here because it seems a bit low tech, but in days gone by, teachers had to do their own photocopying, and then if you remember, there was a sort of diktat from unions that teachers were too good for photocopying and actually administrators should do photocopying. So then all the teachers just brought their photocopying in to give to somebody else to do it and hand it back. We can now quite easily send photocopying in exactly the same way as you would to a printer. You can email your photocopier and it will just produce your photocopying for you. So the teacher doesn't have to do it, the administrator doesn't have to do it, the machine does it for you once you've created your resource. So all of these different forms of automated technology are already in use. And I think music services are probably actually a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of a lot of other education sector providers and also other sectors, in that we've always had, well, not always, but for a long time now, since certainly the beginning of the 21st century, we've had systems like Parator, which some of you may have been using, which again has lots of these automated processes already kind of buried inside them. So we're a little bit ahead of the curve here, I would say. We've got it down with our administration. Communications and marketing, obviously really important for music education hubs, increasingly so. And a lot of this, where you might have had to pay somebody to design you a flyer and then send it to the printers and have them send it back to you and then you have to post it out to people, a lot of this stuff just isn't happening anymore because, again, of the rise of this kind of automative technology. So social media, obviously, and YouTube as well, massive platforms for communications and marketing, are usable by non-specialists, non-marketing specialists, although plenty of people will tell you that they're a social media marketing expert. You don't have to be one in order to make a social media account work. And again, you don't have to be some kind of amazing videographer to make a YouTube channel work for you either. We've all discovered that that's quite easy to put videos together and trim and chop them and stick a title slide on them and pop them up on YouTube. So increasingly, those two things on the top of that list, social media and YouTube, are the main ways that people find their information now. They're unlikely to be looking for a leaflet or going to the library and asking what music teachers are available in the local area. They will be looking on social media, they will be looking on YouTube, and also on your own Music Hub website. So making sure that your information is up to date on a website has always been important, but it's probably never been more important than it is now, because that is where people are going to get directed to from social media and from YouTube to find out more about you. And again, having that automated side to your website where you can book onto things through your website, or you can chat with a bot through your website, is going to keep people engaged with that website and is going to hopefully turn those visitors into customers. Streaming is a massive thing, obviously, both live streams and streams of recorded events. Like today, we're interactive today, so technically we're not streaming, but once this recorded session is online, you could argue that that was a recorded stream of this session. Massively important to music hubs, particularly in the conditions that we've been in, where you've not been able to do concerts and big sings and things like that. So being able to actually still interact with parents and stakeholders and show the amazing work that your young people have done in very challenging circumstances, absolutely fantastic. I watched a live stream concert from Services for Education, who are the music hub for Birmingham, not so long ago now, because my niece was in it, and I honestly was expecting to just see some kind of clunky, one of those little window box video things, and it was like watching a Hollywood blockbuster. I could not believe my eyes. They had live presenters, they had graphics, they had social media going on under the screen. It was like turning on Sky News, but it just all being about music. It was insane. And that sort of thing, I think, is here to stay. And we've always been worrying about how we can fill our concert halls and how we get access to parents who maybe can't afford the tickets if we need to charge for them. That streaming aspect is going to help us to become more inclusive with our performances, which is absolutely fantastic and a real step in the right direction, I think, for music education. On your kind of design and mailing front, where you might have had to go to an agency before and say, oh, I want this information on my leaflet, can you do something fancy with it? We now have loads of design software that, again, is really intuitive and very easy to use. The top two things I use are Microsoft Publisher, which is, I would say, slightly less easy to use than the other thing, which is Canva, which is a web-based free type of software for creating templates for marketing. So it's often possible to get a really professional looking result without actually having to call on the services of a professional graphic designer, which is fantastic. Fantastic for us, less fantastic for the designers who probably want our money. And certainly if you were doing something really high level and fancy, you might well want to go to an agency for that. But for just general things, it's very easy now for you to create your own stuff in-house. And also to be doing really fancy looking mail outs. Again, you used to have somebody with special knowledge put those together so that they would appear in a sort of fancy way in your email. Now you can use things like MailChimp, where you can design an email, it all just formats it for you properly. It will come through to people's inboxes with clickable links, with videos, with all this kind of stuff. We're used to seeing those happen now. And of course, you can automate the sending process as well. So once you've designed them, you can say, well, actually, I don't want that to go out for 3 weeks, and I want it to go out at this certain time to this segment of people. And lots, again, of the work that you would have had to do, write in your diary, oh, today I've got to send emails to X, Y, and Z. You can do that all in one hit when you've created the email, set it all up, and it's ready to go. So there are lots and lots of opportunities for music hubs in their comms and in their marketing to take advantage of those different types of automated marketing processes. And the really great thing about them, of course, is that they give you traceable results. The problem with marketing and advertising traditionally is that you never know if it's worked. I actually come from a family where my dad was an advertising executive for the majority of his career, and had endless trouble persuading clients to actually pay him for his work because they would want to know that it had worked. They go, well, we'll pay you per, a percentage per sale. So, but you'll never know if that sale came from what I did or something completely different. Now, of course, because people have clicked through. You can see through analytics and statistics, you can see that your marketing is actually reaching the right people and working for you, which is brilliant, particularly if you are in the situation where you're going to have to spend some money on it. Maybe you don't have the capacity or the expertise to run your own marketing. You know that you will actually be able to see whether it's working or not, which is a brilliant step in the right direction. Okay, so teaching and assessing is probably the most contentious area, I think, in terms of automated processes, because I think as educators, we would like to feel that, a robot couldn't do our job. More on that later. But there are already lots of apps and websites where there is an element of automation for things that you might have had to do yourself previously as a music teacher. So things like self-marking quizzes. Save you massive amounts of time. Why would you invent your own if there's already one there on the topic and it's just there and it's markable and you can just see how everyone did? Why waste your time doing that yourself? Music First, I know, have got a whole big suite of different apps and things that do self-marking. There's even a practice app, I think, that has the ability to give feedback to a student. So well worth having a look at if you're on the lookout for sort of assessment by machine, but in a pedagogically sound way. The ABRSM obviously have had lots of apps recently over the last sort of 5 or 10 years. Theory apps, they've got an oral training app. I think they might have a sight reading app as well. Again, useful for students to use in their own time to do practice when you're not around. And also for years and maybe decades, we've had musictheory.net, which is a web-based theory website, which again has lots of quizzes in there that will self-mark. You can also set up your own quizzes if you can't find anything that is exactly right. Again, just kind of giving the opportunity for students to interact with that kind of information and know whether they've got it right or not in between lessons. I always think things like sight reading and oral are really difficult to practice on your own, because actually how would you know you got it right? Whereas with these kind of technologies, there is now the possibility to know whether or not your answers were correct, which is going to help you get better in between lessons. Okay, so let's look at some traditional musical learning modes. So the one that most people probably default to is you are taught by a teacher. You are taught to play your instrument or to sing, or indeed, in the classroom, curriculum music, through instruction, and it's quite a formal process. You can be taught through your participation in an ensemble, which we would probably class as enculturation. So the idea of just learning as you go along, by absorbing your learning through what's happening around you, and as a sort of more kind of non-formal, optional kind of scenario. And then we have self-taught, which is a really big thing in music, and always has been. And many music hubs, I've worked with the majority of them now in England. And when I did go round, when I was allowed, um, and talk to people, quite often you find the drum teachers, the guitar teachers in particular, are all self-taught and have now become teachers. So we obviously, there's a strong tradition of that, and we do respect people who have self-taught on particular instruments, perhaps not quite the same for classical instruments as it is for more popular instruments. But that informal learning is definitely something that is really prevalent in music. And we have tried to adopt that into the classroom through schemes like Musical Futures, this idea of sort of marrying the informal approach with a more formal, more instructive approach. So all of these three things on this slide are sort of recognised ways that we would teach music or absorb music or learn music in some way at the moment. And then, of course, we have our current kind of technological musical learning modes, some of which were in use already and some of which have grown more around the pandemic. So we have our Zoom lesson. Other technologies are available. I've just called it a Zoom lesson, but you know that there's Google Meet and there's Teams. Which, in effect, is still your instruction model, isn't it? It's still your formal kind of instruction model of teaching. It's just happening through a screen. We might have video tutorials where, where there's no interaction, we're just kind of watching and learning from something. So it's still kind of instructional, but it's a little bit less formal, perhaps. So it's something that you might dip in and out of when you feel the need. So, I'm not very good at this particular aspect of technique. I'll go and find a video on that to see how that works. And then, of course, a lot of people are sharing their music and posting for comments and feedback. And arguably, that's a form of enculturation, isn't it? It's having other people help you learn how to get better when the internet is working in the best possible way and in the most positive light. That's what will happen. Obviously, we're aware that young people posting things on the internet for comment can go in the wrong direction, but let's assume that you are interacting with lots of other people who are genuinely interested in your music. Then that could be a form of learning through enculturation. And then, of course, young people have always, ever since we've had access to technology, been experimenting with software and with apps, with music technology in an informal way. We even have the title bedroom producer that kind of encapsulates all that going on. Very similar to the idea of the self-taught musician, but in this case, the instrument is the computer. But what we need to think about when we sort of view all these things is that only really that Zoom lesson is going to give us that instant feedback from an expert. Even if we get comments on the internet on our videos, it's not immediate, and B, you don't really know who those people are and whether they actually are an expert. And if you watch a video tutorial, you will get expert advice, but you might not know whether you're actually doing what they've said. You might think you are and you're not. So we need to really consider, when we're looking at using technology moving forward in education, whether trial and error can actually replace that feedback element successfully in all cases. Can somebody working on their own to work out their own problem always correct or effectively correct in the same way that a teacher in a sort of face-to-face situation or a Zoom-to-face situation would be able to do? Okay, so we're going to look at a few learning trends in detail now. So we're going to start with video. And here's some statistics from McCormick in 2021, so very recent. So viewers retain 95% of information from a video compared to 10% from a text. That's a really, really big difference there. And also 96% of people in this particular survey would rather watch and explain a video than read instructions. And in the last 2 years, perhaps unsurprisingly, there's been a 52% increase in the amount of time people spend watching internet videos. The rough figure is about 16 hours a week the average person spends watching videos on the internet, which actually is a bit terrifying, but I imagine that actually there's lots of people watching loads more than that, and then there's lots of people watching loads less, and it's just come out in the middle to look as if we're all spending 16 hours a week looking at these videos. So that's some really interesting stats there, isn't it? And I found the video explainer thing really interesting, because actually that, I have to say, does my head in. I would much rather read instructions than have to sit through a video and wait for them to get to the bit where I want to, where I need the help. But maybe that's because I was, brought up in the olden days and I'm just, not the target market for that. And certainly, I definitely know my husband, who maybe has a more sort of mathematical, analytical, scientific brain than I do, will definitely watch a video rather than reading something. So maybe it's just horses for courses there, but I found that particularly interesting. And the idea that you retain more information from a video than you do from reading as well, is really interesting, particularly coming from a background as a lecturer, and the importance that we place on actually reading the texts that are in the library rather than just going on the internet. That's a really interesting statistic, I think. So what that all tells us is we know that children and also adults are consuming online video at an increasing rate, and that is unlikely to change, I think. So it's going to make sense for music education hubs to prioritise video content, both, I think, as a learning tool and also as a marketing tool. And if you do it right, actually, both of those things could roll into one and do the same job for you. And that will help us to reach new audiences. It will support those learners who might not be interested in engaging in a traditional instructional or formal model, but might need our help in another way. So it might go to encourage people into us, and help us, because we are here as music education hubs to serve our entire regional community, aren't we? So actually, when we're reporting back our statistics to the Arts Council, mostly we're talking about the people that we've seen face to face, the people we've interacted with, but actually what about all the other people who we can never reach for one reason or another? Well, maybe using some video and incorporating our analytics and our stats into our returns, if that is possible for the Arts Council or will become possible in the future, might actually show that we're making more of an impact than we are, on the ground day to day, in terms of our sort of face-to-face interactions. Okay, next thing to talk about is gamification theory. So gamification, again, has been around for a while, but is one of the sort of hot topics in education at the moment, and particularly in universities. So gamification theory is basically, how kids get addicted, and indeed adults, to video games because they've got to get to the next level, or they've got to find the special door, or they've got to, use the special code, the cheat code, and they've got to compete and get the highest score and beat all their friends. All of that stuff could be applied to education to gamify the experience and therefore drive engagement and interaction with education. So you might use things like progress indicators, so badges or points or rewards. I have never met a music teacher in a primary school who does not carry around stickers, so I think we're already there on a very low-tech basis. You might use it as a form of developing have a social network, and set up peer competition around certain tasks. So let's see who can do it the quickest or the most accurately. Schools are already using that through software and websites, things like Purple Mash, Some Dog, where they show you a leaderboard and kids are encouraged to go and practice their times tables and things, and you can see who else in your class is better than you. Also, a feature of gamification is the idea of scaffolded levels. So the addictive nature of gaming is often, I need to get to the next level, and then once I'm there, I need to get to the next level, and then I need to maintain it. I need to not fall backwards. I need to carry on. we can apply that, and should be applying that, to education anyway, because we want children to progress. So theoretically, we should be doing that anyway, and that should help us to adopt a sort of gamified approach. And also the idea of immediate feedback. So the minute something you've done something well, a ping appears, or you get an email, or something flashes across your screen, go, well done, you've done it. So you don't have to wait to find out how you did, which then means you can move on to the next thing, and it becomes addictive, trying to, again, collect those sort of feedback rewards, like those badges, points, and stickers. And of course, music arguably is already gamified, because we've had a graded exam structure for over 100 years. And that is a structured, progressive, kind of level by level approach, and you get a reward at the end of it. You get your certificate. So you can see how actually that would map really well onto music, just instead of having to wait for those certificates to be issued for months and months and months, we might have something that was a little bit more immediate. And you could use it for anything. You could use it for reporting progress. So the more people interact with your platform, the more data you get on them, and therefore you can see whether they're progressing or not. You could use it to encourage practice. So every time you go and log your practice, you get a star or a point or whatever. You could use it for assessment for learning. So going back to that idea of self-marking quizzes and stuff, that will provide you again with useful data to know, okay, well, I might need to cover this in my next lesson because they all got it wrong when they did that particular quiz. You could even use it to deciding who moves up through ensembles and things. As you go, when somebody gets the highest score, great, you can move from training wind to actual wind or whatever it is. But having said all that, the primary purpose of gamifying learning is to inject fun and addictability into the system. So that's what we should be aiming for. We should be aiming to make it fun and engaging. Okay, so we're now on to online learning, which kind of covers a multitude of sins. And I do kind of feel, from our perspective at Music Education Solutions, we do feel like in 2020 everyone else caught up with us. We've been running online stuff for a long time, and it was really interesting as a business last year to see that all these courses, which we thought were great, which we've been selling since 2014, we might sell one a month if we were lucky, and then the pandemic hit, and we sold in a week. We discounted our prices as well to £10, and we sold £3,000 worth of courses in a week, compared to selling one a month for the previous 6 years. So that's not a boast, that's just there to show you that all of a sudden people realised online learning was a thing. And I don't think that is going anywhere now. And certainly from our perspective, we're already getting booked for next year for webinars rather than in-person training. So it's clear that our online learning is definitely here to stay. And there are two kind of modes. There's synchronous, live and interactive, which is what we're doing today. Or there's asynchronous, where you sort of work through on your own. So synchronous learning, the most common form is a webinar, although you could argue that podcasts with an element of kind of being able to phone in would be synchronous learning as well. But the one that most people use is webinar. And asynchronous will be generally delivered through some kind of multimedia resources, so maybe a bit of reading, a bit of video, a bit of audio, maybe some interactive quizzes, hosted on some kind of learning platform. The major one is Moodle. That's the one that most of the universities use. It's completely free, by the way, should you wish to investigate that. And it's really easy to use. I built my own Moodle site. It's not difficult. You just get your web hoster to load Moodle into your system. As long as you've got a hosting company that can deal with that, you have to have a special hosting package, and then actually the actual putting stuff on Moodle is really simple, even simpler, I would say, than things like WordPress. So definitely worth looking into if you're moving in that direction. What I think it is important to remember for online learning is that it's not this magic bullet. And I think people have got a little bit overexcited and gone, it's amazing, you can get learning from all over the world and everyone can be involved. And yes, they can, but only if they've got the internet and a device to be able to watch. And that's not everybody. So the more online learning we do, the more we possibly run the risk of cutting out the most disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged people in our society. In a way that when you went into a school and delivered lessons in a whole class setting, for example, everybody gets the same service, don't they? If we move online, only the people who are able to tune in some way are going to get that access. So it's really, really important to remember. And I think that is on people's radar. There was a lot of talk about children learning from home and the difficulties of that, and schools needing to be adaptable, because if a family only had one laptop, the parents might need that for work at the time that the child needed it for school, or there was no device, or they had a phone but they had no internet. So this is definitely something we've become more aware of and more sensitive to, I think, over the last year. But it's something to bear in mind as we move forward now. This is not a one-stop shop for solving all of your inclusivity problems. So, as I said, music education hubs are definitely still booking us to do online things. Maybe they just don't like me. Maybe they just don't want me to turn up in their area. They'd rather have me behind a screen. But I think it's probably just because it's easier and we know that we can do it now. And it means not having to bring millions of different teachers into the same room at the same time. So it does remove a lot of those kind of cost and time and distance barriers. It can, I would say it should be much more cost effective overall. I have seen some providers who charge exactly the same amount for online as they did for live stuff, and arguably that's not fair, but each to their own. It's likely to stay as an option, I think, as well for your instrumental teaching. Of course, we know that it's really useful in rural areas, and NIMAS, obviously, who are hosting this conference, are the absolute experts in that, in getting remote learning into sort of rural schools to make it possible for them to have peripatetic lessons and other kind of musical interactions, when it might not have been possible in terms of distance or cost effectiveness to actually get a teacher to that school at that particular time slot for those particular children on those particular instruments. So there's a lot to be said for keeping our online learning going in terms of our teacher to pupil delivery. But also, I know music education hubs are all around children and young people, but increasingly there's this sort of drive towards becoming more businesslike and creating more revenue. The Arts Council and the DFE, I would say, have not been helpful, or maybe it's not them, maybe it's just government and they're just the messengers, in terms of the funding arrangements. So we've had year-on-year kind of 1 year funding. Even before then there was like 2 year and 3 year, none of which is particularly helpful, is it? So we don't know what will happen to funding for music hubs. It's possible that music hubs might want to feel that they are in this kind of position where they could carry on in some form if funding was reduced or got rid of, in which case there's a massive market for adult instrumental learners. And I think that online learning would be specifically really attractive to adult learners, because they could log on in their lunchtime from work or from home, while they've got the kids to look after. The kids can be watching the telly and eating the tea in the other room, and they can be having their violin lesson. So that is definitely worth considering, I think, although obviously our funding is there to help support children and young people. As a business model, maybe trying to tap into that adult market might be a really, really good idea. Okay, so that was all the stuff that's like currently happening. And now we're going to look far into the future in my crystal ball. And we're going to look at these 3 different future technological music learning modes. So we have augmented reality. So augmented reality is where you can see real life, but you have computer-generated images imposed over the top, superimposed over the top. Whereas virtual reality is fully computer-generated images. So you don't see anything that's real, you only see what the computer shows you. And we also have artificial intelligence, which is basically computers that can think, which is where it all gets a little bit scary. So let's think about augmented reality to start off with, because this is the aspect, I think, of these 3 technologies that is already being used for music education. And it's really easy, actually, I think, to imagine how AR could support musical learning. So in terms of superimposing images over an instrument, so you've got your actual instrument, but then it might superimpose, coloured dots over your keyboard to show you where to put your hands. It might, on your fretboard, it might show you exactly where to put your fingers for each little bit. There's all kinds of options for that. You would have to wear a mask. I've got one here, in fact. That's what a sort of a very low tech, to be honest, very cheap augmented reality mask looks like. This one's got a slot for putting your own phone in. So all you would need is an app that was on your phone, pop that in there, stick the goggles on, get your instrument out, and theoretically, through augmented reality, you would be able to learn how to play that instrument. And there are lots of apps on the market already and in production that are looking at using AR for musical learning. There's been multiple studies in various different parts of the globe. Interestingly, a lot of these projects seem to have started out with the idea of using augmented reality to help people learn to read music. So the idea that you look at sheet music and then you look at your keyboard, for want of a better example, and that translates into sort of red dot here, yellow dot here to do that. All of the studies into that particular use of AR have concluded that that's actual nonsense, and what happens is people just look at their fingers and just learn to play by where the dots are, and they totally ignore the staff notation aspect, which I think is really interesting in the context of that broader debate around teaching children to learn to read and write music. There's definitely some further work to be done there in, how, I'm being careful because the notation people will get me, but how computers might develop a new system actually that bypasses staff notation in the same way as people sometimes who are self-taught, and indeed in popular music, in folk music, in basically all the traditions other than Western classical. There are lots of people who just learnt by ear, so therefore you could think that you might be able to speed up that process with some visual stuff through AR that doesn't necessarily have to be traditional staff notation. I look forward to the angry people on Twitter later on today. So AR's a thing, it's coming, it's happening, definitely got potential there. Virtual reality is that one step further. And it's a little bit more of a leap because it would be completely computer generated images. And actually the one thing that I should have picked up when I picked up these earlier was the cube that goes with them. So there is a cube with different patterns on, a little bit like QR codes. And when you look at one side of the cube, it brings you into this particular sort of virtual reality world. So virtual reality isn't something that's going to work too well with a traditional instrument because you're not going to be able to see the instrument, you're only going to be able to see the computer generated images. So arguably, because muscle memory is going to be involved in learning to play an instrument, it's more of a leap to try and kind of do it completely virtually. However, that technology over time will become more portable, more affordable. It might make a good start for learning about different instruments. Go, okay, I want my child to play an instrument, but I don't know what instrument there is. Oh, well, they could put their goggles on, and with their cube, they could have a little go at the sort of, pretending to play the pretend instrument and hearing the sound that comes out of it. I can just imagine, like, when you normally do your music hub thing where all the teachers come in, they will play different instruments, the kids go, oh, cool. You could just sit in them all with goggles on. They could just have a go themselves. That's a little bit soulless and upsetting. But cheaper than sending loads of teachers and loads of instruments into the school. So arguably something to be thinking about for the future. And also any kind of immersive learning. So it would be great to have the experience of sitting in a symphony orchestra, for example, or being in a carnival and walking alongside a samba band. I can see that working really, really well for virtual reality. And in fact, there are already a couple of experimental sort of apps and websites where you can actually do that. If you've got a set of VR goggles, you can link to that and you can actually kind of be walking around as these different types of music are playing. So I did joke earlier before you all got here that I was glad to be not talking about the modern music curriculum today, but I'm going to sound the modern music curriculum klaxon because if we want to be, all fancy, somebody could invent a virtual reality experience for all of those different things on the playlist, couldn't they? And you could sit in the ensemble and watch what was going on, and you could be brought back to that time period. That might be really cool. Okay, artificial intelligence. This is the scary bit, I think. And whenever you say, robot teachers, people go, "Oh, don't be silly." But there are actually loads of parts of the music learning process, particularly with an instrument, which can be troubleshot with diagnostics, essentially. So when you hear a child play out of tune, you will know through experience that it will be for one of a certain number of reasons. All you need to do is teach the computer to identify those reasons, and then they can do your job. Sorry. I'm really sorry to break this to you. So on a basic level, robot teachers could well be a thing. When you get to the higher level stuff of artistic interpretation and all that kind of stuff, that's where the robot is going to struggle, I'm afraid. But for the basics, that is theoretically possible. And more frighteningly, the care sector is genuinely looking into robot carers because of all the trouble they've had, obviously, with COVID and trying to keep it out of care homes. And that really upsets me. The idea of, your granny being locked in a miserable care home and only interacting with a robot, I mean, that's horrific. But again, practical and possibly sensible in case we have another pandemic in the future, but upsetting. And this is just a brag that I'm going on holiday next week to a hotel that has the UK's first robot room service butler. She's called Betty, and you better believe that the first thing I'm going to be doing as soon as I get into my room is ordering whatever's on the menu to be delivered by Betty, the robot butler, because that is basically the only reason I'm going. I will definitely tweet my interaction with Betty, so keep your eye out in half term for that to appear. So these things are coming, these things are happening. Because music is an art form, it's further away for us than it is for perhaps, like if I was a maths teacher, I might be a little bit scared now. But for things that don't necessarily work too well with logic, then we are several steps down the line in terms of what might be achievable. So here's a possibility for the future, for what might happen in the future. So in her pocket, the child's phone beeps. Oh, it's time for her lesson. Puts on her goggles, connects to the app. The app notifies her parent that a lesson is taking place, updates the credit level in their account. And then in front of her eyes, the child's point score and badges flash by, showing her ranking against other students of her age and experience. How is she doing? Is she winning the competition? A video plays, reminding her of what was covered in the last lesson. She tries a few exercises. The app marks them in real time. It shows that she's ready to move on. It sends an alert to activate the robot teacher stored in her cupboard. And the lesson can begin. This presentation was made possible by a variety of different futuristic technologies: the internet, electricity, had that one for a while, Apple Mac, Microsoft. This entire PowerPoint was created with Microsoft's automated design tools, where it just decided how it would look best, and I just clicked on it. Zoom, of course, Eventbrite, how you managed to get into the Zoom in the first place, and ourselves at Music Education Solutions and the lovely people at NIMAS. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we will have plenty of time for some questions.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was fascinating. And I'm not going to lie, a little bit scary as well. But wow, so much to think about and imagine of what our future might look like with music educations. Okay, Q&A time, everybody. Has anybody got any questions for Elizabeth? Please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and I will present your question to Elizabeth. You can also raise your hand through the Q&A and you can speak your question if you prefer. Or if you've got a robot to hand, maybe they can speak on your behalf. A couple of questions to kick things off. How do you think funders need to change how they might measure impact of digital provision?
Okay, so funding is not, I will say, not my specialist area, and I'm really glad that I don't have to jump through all the hoops that music hubs have to do. As a partner in several music hubs, all I really have to do is just send random numbers once a year. But definitely something that funders should be looking at, because actually, arguably, a program that's seen fewer people in person but has been broadcast to thousands of other people may be of more value than one where they've had hundreds of people in person. So it's definitely something that needs looking at in the future. What is impact, and what is reach, and what should music hubs be trying to do? Are they meant to reach every single young person in their area, or just the ones that are interested in music and are in the schools and available for teaching? Definitely something worth bearing in mind.
Yeah. I mean, this is a big question that I don't expect you to have the answer to entirely, but I mean, I guess we've got to consider ethical implications as well, haven't we, as a sector? Do you have thoughts about that? Obviously, one of the career paths for young musicians that they may want to take on is the career path of a music teacher. And essentially that would be closing off a potential career path, wouldn't it? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, we do need to be mindful of that, and on the other hand, we've created this technology. It's inevitable, it's happening. We need to find ways to work with it. I think it's a long way off to say that we would be able to replace all forms of teaching with robots. I hope that doesn't ever really happen, because that would be really, imagine sending your kid to nursery or reception to be left alone with a robot for the day. I mean, that really would be cause you some mum guilt, I think. But of course, what we have to remember is that it's not just things like automation that are barriers into becoming a music teacher. With the proposal to remove all the funding from university music courses, and indeed other arts, and archaeology is up for the chop as well. And there's a proposed plan to reduce student fees as well. So from this September, if all those things go through, 50% of the funding for music courses in universities will be lost, and then also they will get £1,500 less per student. And then from the following September, all of the funding will have gone, other than the student fees. So already we're going to see a narrowing of the possibilities for becoming a music teacher, because it'll be very difficult for you to actually take a music degree. It'll be very competitive. A lot of the universities have already said, if the funding's going, we can't afford to run music. So that, coupled with the fact that maybe online tutorials might become of more benefit or more widely used than an actual interaction with a teacher, I would say that is worrying for people thinking about entering that profession.
Yeah, and of course, I totally take on board everything you say there, but robots can't replicate the small talk that's so important. That's not small at all, is it? How's your pet hamster? One of my pupils recently has adopted a pigeon that's living in their hen coop, and every lesson there's an update on that. Those things are really important, aren't they, for bonding and creating a really good creative process. And it'll be interesting to think, how can that be replicated in a robotic world? Can it be at all?
Yeah, and of course we've got to remember that teaching is not just about teaching facts and figures and skills. It's also about teaching children how to interact with each other and other humans. And if you take all the humans out of the equation and just give them a robot, they're not going to learn those skills. And arguably, those skills are more important than the things that they learn about music. Again, I'm looking forward to the Twitter backlash for that. But yeah, arguably that is really the purpose of education, is to come out able to function in society and interact with people. So I can't see that we would take every single human teacher away from children and leave them just with robots.
Yeah, it's about creating a really workable balance, isn't it?
Also, I think if you were a naughty child, you'd just find out how to turn the robot off, wouldn't you? and then do whatever you like until 3:30. That would have been me at school.
Yeah,
Plug
that's
out,
true.
see what we can do.
Yeah, the equivalent of smashing a CCTV camera or something. Yeah. Got another question for you. What do you think the implications of automation are for locally based services like hubs now that geographic location is less important?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't there? Because there's always been a sort of gentleman's agreement that people don't cross over into each other's areas, and now that's going to be really difficult to police. And arguably, you could say, well, I put this investment into these things. If they're being used by other people, why shouldn't they be used by other people? So there's definitely discussions to be had, I think, about how hubs operate across regions in the future. And a lot of hubs, of course, have partnered up now. So I mean, the Greater Manchester hub is a prime example. Right from the start, they've all been individual hubs that are part of one big hub. We've got one in the West Midlands as well, the music partnership that's happened in the last couple of years. So already hubs were moving towards that idea of broadening out what they do. So I think as a part of partnership working, I can see that would be less problematic than if you're a hub on your own trying to hold on to your own region and not work with anyone else. That's where you're going to run into difficulties, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned digital poverty and how that really needs to be tackled before there's real equality in access to an online offer being, the core part of a hub's offer. Any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's something that has to happen right at the top. That's something that ought to be a government priority, and they will tell you that it is. But then, we're still waiting for the laptops that Gavin Williamson promised us this time last year. And it's like lots of things, like the whole free school meals thing as well. You just think, well, actually, the effort it's taken to sort of try and get people to listen to why that's important, and actually it would have been something that could be from the top. Someone could have just gone, yeah, actually, do you know what, we don't want kids to be hungry, let's just give everyone free school meals, and then work from there. And same with access to the internet and devices. Why we can't have a sort of national rolling out of broadband for absolutely everybody, why everything has to be, I mean, I'm saying this as someone who works in the private sector, runs a company in the private sector, but why everything has to be privatised and why we have to use a capitalism model for everything, when there are basic things that would really help. But then you could argue that as well as, providing access and providing devices to children, well, actually then, if we're going to do it properly, providing a universal basic income for everybody might be an idea, providing free school meals for everybody might be a good idea, providing free wraparound care. So it's all part of this same kind of systemic problem that we have, where I think governments will say the right thing, but ultimately they do not have the life experience to understand what it is like to be living, in a 2-bedroom flat where you're all sharing one room and where you haven't got a laptop and you've just got your mum's phone and you're all trying to use it for different things and it's only got so much credit on it and it's phone credit or food. So I think it's part of a wider sort of social issue that I don't know if we'll ever, it's really sad, but I don't know if we'll ever get to the stage where we fix that, because it needs to be done from the top and they're not interested.
Yeah. I've really found it so interesting, that stat that you produced at the beginning about 95% of video information is retained by viewers as opposed to 10% via text. I mean, that is just incredible, that stat. Really, really fascinating, and it's such a powerful statistic to advocate for working in a very different way to what we have done traditionally. I loved the gamification and thinking about I mean, we all need to really consider about making learning more playful, don't we? And again, that's really powerful advocacy for that. Have you got any further thoughts on gamification?
I think we're in a good place with music because music's already enjoyable.
Yeah,
So, anything that we add to it is just going to make it even better. So already we're starting from a better standing point than, I keep saying maths, I'll get in trouble, but which a lot of people do not find enjoyable whatsoever. Most people find some form of music enjoyable, even if it's just listening to music. Whereas I would say there's a large proportion of people who would not want to go and sit in a maths lesson ever again. So they have to work harder, whereas we're doing a fun thing anyway, and then if you add all the other stuff on top, well, wow, the sky's the limit.
yeah. And actually, a lot of music is mathematical, isn't it? It's just like very exciting maths.
Yeah,
That's what I try and tell music theory pupils anyway.
yeah, no, that is true. And certainly when I was at university, there was a split between people who'd done English and music at A level and people who'd done maths and music at A level. And definitely those different type of musicians do definitely think in a completely different way, but the overall result is the same.
Yeah. So do we have any further questions for Elizabeth today? Okay, I think we may have covered all our... we have a raised hand. Elizabeth Parbut. So, I'm just going to work out how to... There we go. I've unmuted you, Elizabeth, if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I was just interested to hear about any apps and things that Elizabeth would recommend for sort of younger pupils learning, especially on the AR side of things. I don't know if there's any that you would suggest we all have a play with.
Most of them are sort of in early stages of development. There's a couple of things. So I think Gibson have brought out a guitar app. I'm not entirely sure actually whether that might only be available in America. It might not be available here. And there's a piano one that originates in Korea, I think. And you can find, actually, if you Google like music education AR, you will find adverts for this music app all over the shop and lots of research about it. But whenever you click on any part of their website, it doesn't appear that you can get it. So whether it's been taken down or whether they've just done their marketing before they've actually released it is a little bit difficult to gather. But that's the one that there was the research study behind, where they said, we were trying to get people to learn to read music, but actually they just used the dots and they just learned to play the instrument. So whether they've kind of taken that back to do a bit more work on it, I'm not sure. So it's all of those things are still kind of in development, so there's nothing I would recommend you jumping straight into right now, although I'm just trying to remember where I found... That's annoying. I should have that information to hand. I did find a really good website not so long ago where you could, I think it was, there was a kind of clip of musicians in India, and you could go and put with your goggles, you could kind of be immersed in that. And there were another couple of different countries that you could visit through music. It might have been National Geographic, but I will dig around after this and I will put it on Twitter when I find it.
Oh yeah, I'd love to have a play with that. It sounds amazing. Thank you.
I've got one more question actually. I'm aware of sound artists who've been using augmented reality and virtual reality. In fact, one of the Turner Prize, there were 4 Turner Prize winners last year, weren't they? Because they shared it between them. One of those artists is a renowned virtual reality sound artist. Do you see any scope, or are you aware of any research that's being done or practice that's being done that is bridging the world of education and sound art?
No, I'm not really, but just because I'm not doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I imagine there probably is quite a lot of work going on in the background. And I know that there's lots of work with orchestras for kind of virtual meet the orchestra sort of things, which a lot of them are kind of online on a website where you do a sort of 360 tour. You can see that that would quite quickly be adaptable to wearing a headset and actually walking around in that sort of area. So I would say artists and musicians definitely are playing with those technologies, and they will come to music education in the sort of fullness of time.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, we'll wrap that up there then. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Just absolutely fascinating, a window into the future. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope to see you later in the week. Bye bye.